My name is Stephanie Waller, pronouns she, her, and I am the program director at Grantmakers for Education. On behalf of our entire team, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Back to School and Forward into Power. I also want to thank our co-sponsors, Communities for Just Schools Fund. We are joined by a phenomenal lineup of speakers today representing both CJSF and their movement partners for a really powerful and timely conversation in time for the start of the 2024-25 school year. And with both a new school year underway, a presidential election on the horizon, we know that young people, caregivers, educators are all organizing and building power in communities, really centering and elevating the voices of young people in pursuit of education justice. And during today's program, which is running 90 minutes, you'll learn more about CJSF's work to support these efforts, as well as hearing directly from CJSF's movement partners about what this current moment requires from all of us, a really diverse and widespread coalition of stakeholders and partners across sectors, really seeking to advance education justice. We recognize that our audience today comes from a range of perspectives and experiences related to education justice, and we want to hear from you. So we invite you to deeply engage throughout today's program. There's going to be opportunities in the chat, as well as via some questions that we pose via Zoom at a couple of key points in the program. So please let us know where you're coming from. We definitely want to hear from you. We want this to be a conversation. And with some of those housekeeping items out of the way, I'm happy to now turn things over to Manuela Arciniegas, the Dynamic Executive Director of CJSF, who will get us started. Thank you, Manuela. Welcome.
Thank you so much, GFE family, funders and friends, movement leaders and parents, young people, used to be young people, all of the powerful lineage and experiences that brought you here today. We're so happy you're here with us. My name again is Manuela Arciniegas. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm the Executive Director of Communities for Just Schools Fund. I'm an Afro-Dominican mother of 4 children who are educated in New York's public schools. I'm zooming in from the sacred land of the Miccosukee and Seminole people in Florida, right here in Hollywood, where I was born and have not returned to in many, many years. So there's some serendipity going on today. We're so delighted to welcome you to this powerful session called Back to School and Forward into Power. Today, we're going to hear from inspiring grassroots organizing and movement lawyer leaders about the ways that they're assessing the current political moment and how they're preparing for the challenges and opportunities ahead as young people head back to school, as community organizations and all of us prepare for the elections and their aftermath. Before I get started, I encourage you to jump into the chat because we are a participatory bunch. Please share your name, your organization, the place you're calling from, and if you've already done so, please also add an example of when do you feel powerful? With whom? What are you doing? What does that mean to you? When do you feel powerful? CJSF and GFE proudly welcome all funders and individual donors into this learning and action container, irrespective of where you are around these issues. Today, we're going to review the agenda, do a little bit of welcoming and grounding, map some of the trends on the horizon. Next slide, please. Talk a little bit about what is education justice. Hear from our brilliant political community strategists and how they're making meaning of this moment and what are the various scenarios that they are currently preparing for. We're going to talk a little bit about the critical role of building governing power if we do want to make significant headway and transform education for all of our communities, and then engage in a brief question and answer. Again, we will invite your voices in, so please chat reactions, questions, curiosities, wisdom and knowledge that you already have so that this can be maximum learning for all of us together. Before I start, I would love to go to the next slide and share with you a couple of grounding agreements. Stay open, be curious. We welcome half-baked ideas, whether you eat cookie dough or not. All of it is welcome here. We're hard on issues and we're soft on people. This is a really challenging time to navigate in the history of our country and in our communities. And so let's be kind to each other. We welcome you to move up and move back, make room for new voices, and also accept and expect a lack of closure. If we could figure all of this out in one webinar, oh, where would we be? Finally, please practice self-care. This is a shoulders down relational space. And so if you want to come off video and you want to eat your lunch, please do what you need to take care of yourself. So the next slide will I'll tell you a little bit about Communities for Just Schools Fund. We are a national collaborative of community organizers and funders who work to advance education and broader justice in schools and communities. Our mission is to resource the power of the young global majority, their caregivers, their educators, as they build liberatory education that centers safety, dignity, justice, and wellness. We envision a world where Black, Brown, Indigenous, trans, queer, migrant, neuroexpansive, and disabled peoples are all holistically safe, where they experience their communities and schools full of care, affirmation, and belonging. CJSF and our donor members and organizer squad resource and superpower the grassroots organizing field while you all work alongside your policy, research, narrative, and system leaders to ensure that all young people have the power they need to advance racial, gender, immigration justice, that they can lift and augment their voices, that they can design and govern the schools and the communities that they want to be a part of. Next slide. Since 2015, CJSF has partnered with inspiring donor members at our table, and we've been able to engage diverse philanthropic institutions to deploy over $31 million to the grassroots organizing field. You see a little bit about who our people are. They're Black, Brown, Indigenous, women, gender nonconforming, migrant. They're in urban and rural communities. They are engaging and organizing bases that represent over 1 million people across the country in 22 states and territories, including Puerto Rico and Canada. Next slide. Some of what we provide for our partners are grants, capacity building, network building and convening, responsiveness, federal field building work that might look like federal strategy coordination and other things that the field needs in its evolving work. Right now, I would love to talk to you a little bit about some of the current contexts and conditions. Next slide. So currently, young people of color in low-income communities face the monumental obstacles that have historically gotten in their way of their ability to access a justly funded, safe, and transformative education. These challenges are now compounded by polarization, things that we've seen across the country. And that polarizing forces have led to the privatization and closure of public schools, have led to ballooning allocations of public budgets to policing and criminalization. They've led to policy and approaches that do not redress the harm of discrimination and exclusion that communities historically face. However, the changing tide of political forces in our nation have placed all families and educators on the precipice of this monumental challenge. The capture of public institutions by leaders and forces committed to widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots. What is being contested for in this political season? You guessed it, the magic word, power. Power in its many forms. Power to dictate which schools stay open, what public budgets will be resourcing and prioritizing, which policies will further discriminate and silence Black, migrant, Indigenous, disabled, politicized, queer or trans, youth, caregivers, families, and educators. I'm so grateful you all have shared how and when you feel powerful in the chat, because when we talk about power, we're talking about resources, political capital, access. We're talking about safety and security. And I just want to take a collective deep breath with you. We're currently in mourning. We got the news today that there was a school shooting at the Appalachia High School in Georgia. Georgia also happens to be the state that has been that has really widespread participation in a public referendum that has turned out more voters than the recent mayoral election in Atlanta. And all of these voters were asking for the closure and the end of Stop Cop City. This Stop Cop City is a multi-billion-dollar effort to take public budgets and monies away from education, healthcare, housing, social services, and erect real live military training grounds for police. As you see Nico sharing in the chat, 5 things you should know about Cop City. And the reason I bring that up in light of the recent school shootings is that often we make the mistake of thinking that safety means policing, that being in a safe environment requires criminalizing force, when in fact, as many of our partners who've worked on multiple school shooting events across our history, their work and the community has shown us that it is not policing that is the answer. It is actually resourcing and superpowering the voices and the visions of young people to explain what a safer environment looks and means, what a more adequate and effective education means for young people, and how to better engage and support the leadership and participation of their caregivers and their educators in schools. So there's a lot at stake, y'all, in this upcoming presidential election. For young people and their families, it's a difference between that whether they'll be misgendered or face more bullying in schools, more policing and surveillance, or will they get less access to free or reduced lunch, whether they'll be under the watchful eyes of surveillance vape technology, whether there will be a nearby school that they can attend that is public, whether they will be forced to pray in a religion they don't practice, or be completely erased from history because of being African American or being of Arab descent. Yet we know that elections are not the only terrain in which grassroots visionaries are contesting for power. It is an important lever, but not the only one. Our community organizers, their ability to contest and win transformative change will require us to long-term resource them in their work, because they have to build leaders who are directly impacted and prepare them over and over to step into powerful positions where they demand the change, they design the plans of transformation, and they implement and protect them. Today, we're going to hear from our organizer and movement lawyer leaders how they make meaning in this political moment, how threats like Project 2025 align or reinforce underlying values and plans of those contesting for electoral power, and how the organizing field continues to engage everyday, regular people, our superheroes, to ensure that there's equity and justice for all. As we work together and lift their voice, they're the ones helping ensure that this American democracy is not just a promise, but it is a fact. And it requires building leaders to stay civically engaged, to contest for governing power. We invite you all here to remain curious, ask questions, jump into the chat again, use your emojis, and make sure that we all collectively step into the severity of what this moment is calling of all of us from philanthropy, so that we can take the actions, the radical transformative actions required, so that we don't yet have to look back 5 years from now and regret that we did not do what we could do to stop another Parkland, to stop the erasure and the criminalization and the harm of our children in their schools. So with that, please join me in welcoming one of our inspirational donor member leaders, Erin Morris. Erin sits at our donor member table and is a leader at the Hill Snowden Foundation. Welcome, Erin, and thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Manuela. Hello, everyone. As a proud CGSF donor member, I am so happy to be here with you all today. A big thanks to our speakers and to Communities for Just Schools Fund and Grant Makers for Education for putting this all together. My name is Erin Morris, and I use she, her pronouns. I am a proud South Korean adoptee based on the unceded lands of the Piscataway tribe, known as Baltimore City, Maryland, where I live with my husband, 4-year-old son, and our 2 cats. I am the program associate at the Hill Snowden Foundation, leading up our DC grant making and strategy work. We are a national social justice funder supporting grassroots community organizing and have been in operation for over 75 years. And now, before we jump in, let's get to know each other. We're going to launch a poll that invites you to share more about yourself. Please select all the options that apply to you. Okay, great. It's great to see we have about 50% of folks as funders, the other half community organizers, everyone identifying everywhere else in between. Um, Great to see the number of folks who um, also public school graduates as well. So that's great. Thank you all for sharing. And with that, I would like to now share a little bit more about our relationship with CGSF and what brings us to this space. Back in 2021, our partnership with CGSF was a very intentional decision to support an intermediary that would help strengthen and support education justice work. I can't say enough how intermediaries like CGSF allow smaller foundations like ours to really amplify our impact. And while HSF has been a longtime supporter of youth organizing and education justice, racial equity has always been an implied part of that work. Yet it has been a decade of intentional shifts in increasing our funding support. From when we first created our Making Black Lives Matter initiative to making it a permanent program area. And then in 2020, when the foundation made an additional commitment of $5.5 million over 5.5 years directly from our endowment as part of our racial justice strategy. And as we've been moving closer to the end of that commitment in 2026, we recognize groups were seeing an overwhelming drop in support and that many foundations were already pulling back on their giving or simply not renewing their previous commitments. When urged by our groups to take a stance and to address the growing disinvestment, specifically in organizing and grassroots groups with our funder partners, Hill Snowden responded with the decision to permanently increase our grants budget for this work by $500,000 annually. Today, our partnership with CGSF represents one of our strongest allies as a critical first-line defense against the constant attacks on public education and how we can help support the 78 plus member organizations in their fight to build the power necessary to address systemic barriers and inequities in the educational system. If you are here today, it is because you believe in the power of transformative change. And I encourage you to join us, recommit with us to do what is necessary. And it is absolutely necessary that we provide the means to support this work and what is coming next across the country. And I hope that what you hear from folks today speaks to the power, progress, and imperative of those community-led efforts. And next, I would also like to introduce another short answer poll and ask folks to share what are the challenges on the horizon that feel most pressing for you and for your community at this moment. And I apologize, for some reason, I'm not able to see the responses. So I'm not sure if other folks might want to share, but I know we're running a little bit behind, so I'm gonna jump forward. But thank you all for sharing that. Now we're going to get started with an overview of the landscape from Jessica Alcantara with the Advancement Project. Thank you, Jessica, for grounding us all with such an important overview of the conditions that communities are contending with as we go back to school and move through this electoral season. And speaking of this season, there's no question that organizers are called to do even more than usual in electoral cycle. Get out the vote work, candidates forums, voter suppression prevention, and this year, scenario planning for not just the different possible election outcomes, but also those different outcomes implications for community safety and even the preservation of public education itself. Each scenario requires political education, leadership development, and base building and mobilization. While organizers are engaged in these important activities, many of us in philanthropy and other sectors are planning around what policy and practice changes will be possible and when, depending upon if we see a change in administration. We want to invite questions and dialogue here that help us all to consider how any actions we are taking now are grounded in avoiding disconnects and moving together towards schools and communities where children are holistically safe and have access to opportunities that support them to thrive. So as you're listening to Jessica, we encourage you to do two things. Please share your questions via the Q&A function and note the topics Jessica mentions where your foundation is supporting this work. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Manuela, and thank you, Erin. It's great to be with you all today. My name is Jessica Alcantara. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a senior staff attorney at Advancement Project, working primarily on our Opportunity to Learn team. Next slide. Our Opportunity to Learn program here at Advancement Project fights for education justice by supporting campaigns led by Black and Brown young people and families across the country to dismantle the school to prison pipeline and to really ensure all children receive a quality education and attend schools where they feel safe and can thrive. Our theory of change is rooted in building power for people of color and directly and effectively dismantling structural racism. We do this work through a model of lawyering called movement lawyering. So we bring together law, policy, strategic communications, and organizing strategies in partnership with communities in our work towards racial justice. So as a national organization that works with local grassroots groups, we're able to provide kind of that big picture 30,000 foot perspective to the issues that we work on and support with our partners. And what we know from our work, and especially in the past couple of years, is that this is a critical time for public education in this country. We are at a precipice where some folks are using schools and fights over things like critical race theory to divide and distract us from addressing the real problems in our society, all the while seeking the complete dismantling of public education as we know it. Next slide. September has just started, which means the majority of public schools across the country have begun the school year. For us, back to school time means being extra vigilant, as we know that the first few weeks of school are usually met with increased police violence and assaults against young people. As part of the national campaign for police-free schools that we co-lead with the Alliance for Educational Justice, we have been tracking police assaults of young people. Over 300 acts of school police violence have occurred since 2007. Just recently, there was an article in the Washington Post about a school resource officer in South Carolina who was repeatedly accused of sexually assaulting girls, but still managed to work at his school for years. And just this morning, there was another school shooting tragedy outside of Atlanta in Georgia. We're devastated that people have lost their lives. It's every family's worst nightmare. And it makes us even more angry and persistent about fighting for the safety of our children. And students, we know that they're going back to schools this year that have more surveillance than ever before. School districts have invested thousands of dollars, not on the supports that young people fighting for police-free schools have been asking for, but on tech surveillance, so-called weapons detection systems, social media and student monitoring apps, and an ever-growing list of AI uses that have the potential to further criminalize young people. I'm not moving enough. My light just went off in my office. It's funny. Even though youth organizers, many of whom won fights to remove police from their schools in 2020, even though they've called for mental health supports and resources, school districts have instead increasingly turned to surveillance technologies as solutions to the growing mental health crises that students are facing, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. And these fights to end the criminalization of young people are happening at the same time as broader attacks on public schools themselves are also going on. We've been seeing a new wave of school closures in cities, towns, rural areas across the country, often targeting those serving Black, Brown, and low-income communities. We are seeing school districts all using the same arguments to justify these closures: a lack of funding or budget due to declining enrollment, or a desire to right-size the district, even though the research shows that closing a school harms students, families, and their communities, and that there's no actual evidence pointing to right-sizing a district having any kind of positive effect on students. Districts have been undeterred and continue to propose closing neighborhood schools and stripping communities of an institutional anchor. we recently published an action kit for organizers working to stop school closures to be able to help combat those narratives that school districts push that often go unchecked. And unfortunately, school closures are ramping up. In the 2023-2024 school year, we tracked over 70 school districts who had proposed closing schools, and we expect that number to increase significantly this school year. 412 Justice in Pittsburgh, who you'll hear from later, is currently in a fight against the school closures proposed in their district. And Movimiento Poder is facing potential closures as well, as the superintendent in Denver has all but assured people that he will close schools regardless of any community input in opposition. Next slide. And so, of course, all of this is happening, and we're looking ahead to the federal election in November, right? These fights that organizers are waging against policing and criminalization in schools and to protect their neighborhood schools are increasingly important. One of the presidential candidates is running on a platform, Agenda 47, and its detailed, lengthy cousin, Project 2025, that wants to get rid of the Department of Education, that wants to gut crucial lifelines for communities like Title I funding, that wants to insert prayer and religion into schools and have what they call universal school choice, which would essentially cut parents a voucher check for them to spend it at the religious private school of their choosing. If these goals were carried out, they would be utterly devastating for communities, and low-income children of color would suffer the most. And while we must continue to be prepared for these attacks at the federal level, we know how vital it is to continue to fight and focus efforts at the state level as well. The wins and progress that organizers are making in their cities and towns are increasingly being undermined by state-level preemption. And what this means is that in cities like Miami, Tampa, Austin, San Antonio, their fights for police-free schools have to also contend with state laws directly targeted at their campaigns, like mandating that every school has a police officer. Similarly, fights against school closures and against the privatization of public education are undermined by state actors wishing to pass voucher laws and other measures that further strip public schools of much needed funding. And because we do this work with organizers and communications professionals, we know that these battles for the heart of public education in this country are also narrative fights. And those who would seek to privatize and dismantle public education have been waging culture wars, arguing about CRT being taught in schools or banning books that even mention someone being LGBTQ, among other, of their nefarious goals. And these fights on curriculum really aren't new, right? We know that they are a fear-mongering tactic to motivate their base. They echo previous attempts to stifle Black history and Chicano studies in schools that young people fought for in the 60s, in the civil rights era. So we know that these narrative efforts are part of their broader purpose to really undermine public schools in order to facilitate dismantling them later. Decades of vilifying teachers, of schools portrayed as failing, has made it so that when they push for schools to be closed, people are more likely to welcome that outcome instead of oppose it. Unfortunately, decades of so-called education reform that targeted traditional public schools has also laid the groundwork for the distrust in public education that we see today, and that is facilitating the privatization growth. And this is the context in which kind of groups like ours and of the organizations you'll hear from in a minute operate. There's so much work to be done at every level with young people, parents, communities, school districts, cities, states, at the federal level. And amidst this dire need, education justice organizers themselves are being threatened, and funding has gone down. The reduced funding and investment by philanthropy really threatens the voice and leadership of directly impacted folks and makes the long-term work of critical relational organizing more difficult. We knew that the Supreme Court striking down affirmative action would have negative effects on college students in particular, but we did not anticipate how big of a chilling effect it would have on anyone doing racial justice work or work that is unafraid to call out the root causes of the systemic issues in society today. So organizations fighting for education justice need to be well-resourced to be able to combat these attacks on public education. Instead of privatizers pushing for stripping communities of their decision-making power and shifting that to private entities, groups are fighting to build governing power and fighting for community control. In Denver, Colorado, for example, where the Denver Public Schools District has moved to a policy governance model of operating that essentially gives more power to the superintendent and strips community voice, organizations like Movimiento Poder are necessary to resource and build leadership of their base. The fact is that if not for MP in Denver fighting for community power, DPS would operate with little to no accountability, particularly as the district is set to announce school closures in November. And of course, in places without elected school boards, building up an organizing base is even more important. Our communities cannot afford to lose their public schools, right? Or to have their young people and families continue to be policed and criminalized in schools. We need well-resourced education justice organizers to fight against these large-scale attacks that are coming at us from every angle and every level. So I'll stop there and I'll pass it to, who am I passing it to?
You're passing it to me. This is
Thank you,
Jamie.
Jamie.
Thank you so much, Jessica. No question, that was an incredibly incisive foundation for us all on what the stakes are in this moment. Thank you very much. I'm Jamie Coppell. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm dialing in from the traditional lands of the Piscataway people, known here as Tacoma Park, Maryland. Just a reminder, please, to you all that we welcome your questions. We want to know what you want to know. So please help us by sharing them in the chat, and we'll be saving time to get to those towards the end of our time together. So we're going to talk now with our movement partners, and we're going to pick up some of the threads that Jessica has introduced. We're going to hear from folks working in and across the Northeast, Southwest, the South, and across the United States, and even internationally. And they're going to tell us about their work and how it's addressing the challenges and opportunities that Jessica named. And then we're going to get conversational before we come to your questions. So I'm going to turn first to Angel Gober. Angel's the executive director at 412 Justice, a multiracial, intergenerational, multi-issue org that focuses on economic, environmental, and education justice. Angel, we're so glad that you're here. And I'm going to give you a multi-part question and invite you to share so we can learn more about 412 Justice. So can you tell us about the conditions that 412 Justice is working in Western Pennsylvania? How are you building your base to prevent school closures and ensure schools are robustly funded? And what is your organization's vision for holistically safe schools where children are supported to thrive? What are you doing to work towards that vision?
Thank you, Jamie. So my name is Angel Gober, and I am the executive director with 412 Justice. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And we sit on the Delaware territory in Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh. So I just wanted to start off with our vision to kind of frame kind of who we are and what we seek to do in our community. So 412 Justice envisions a safe and healthy environment where Black, Brown, and disabled communities can thrive with an abundance of culturally relevant resources specific to the areas of economic, environmental, and education justice. So some of the conditions that we are under, many of which Jessica touched on, I feel education it can be very doom and gloom when we're taking on so many big issues. But we are a small city with a big heart. We do find it hard to get support in our area, in our region, because of our size and population. We are barely holding the line in the fight for public education. One of our slogans is, we want to fight to save public schools, but we also want to fix them to make sure that they are serving our students, primarily Black, Brown, and kids with disabilities. We still have a democracy around electing school board members. And we, kind of hold the line against school privatization policies, holding the line against charter school expansions, and harmful vouchers that continue to strip away at our already small kind of operating budgets. And so, we often see not too much collaboration when it comes to cross government. So we have a school board, we have city council, and we have county council. And we don't really have partnership within cross government on public education, which is a barrier in our side of the world. And so, last week, 2 weeks ago, the school district came out with a school closure and consolidation plan, which includes about 40% of our schools. So we have about 16 schools slated to close or to be merged together. And we find that problematic because there wasn't a community input process. Parents and caregivers were not fully engaged. Teachers and students have not participated in these scenarios that have been produced by an outside consultant that we paid $250,000 to. So it feels like a copy and paste situation. And there hasn't been any inclusion around census data. There hasn't been inclusion around the city strategic plan to increase affordable housing. There isn't any information incorporated in the plan around our public transportation systems. So we are quickly organizing against this unthought out plan. We've begged the school district to do an equity audit of past school closures so we can see areas in which students have been impacted and or harmed. So, we have a big battle ahead of us. And, these are the conditions in which we are under and fighting to keep our public schools open and moving and growing. So did I answer your question, Jamie? I know.
You did, Angela. That was great. And I hope folks will kind of continue the threads of what you've introduced here, right? Jessica talked about school closures and you've given a little context. And I am going to encourage folks to ask you questions in the chat that we'll come back around to, or you can also respond just to help folks understand, like, what does your everyday work look like, right? You are clearly deeply informed on what the levers of power are and how to pull those levers, right? And like that accountability factor. So encouraging folks to bring their questions in, and then we're going to come back to some dialogue, but I'm going to turn next with much gratitude to you, Angel, for kicking us off, to Naila Summers-Polite, who is the co-executive director of Dream Defenders. Naila, we're so glad that you are here with us. Dream Defenders base building and political education has created a political home for Black, Brown, and working class youth across Florida. And these days, we know that you are so excitingly and thoughtfully expanding nationwide too. So want to do another one of my multi-part questions and invite you to just talk to us about how Dream Defenders is approaching base building and political education. And how do those approaches really create the conditions for winning locally and beyond? And why? And this is something super exciting. Why is the work you're doing to meet people's direct needs through the Healing and Justice Center a really important part of your strategy?
Thanks, Jamie. I am going to do my very best to do this thoughtfully and quickly. But yeah, thanks again for having us on the call. Naila Summers-Polite, co-director of Dream Defenders, calling from Jacksonville, Florida, which is Miccosukee, Timucuan, Seminole land, 50 miles from Fort Mose, which is a maroon community where freed enslaved people and indigenous folks, waged really, frankly, cool fights against colonialism. So grateful to be calling from here and sitting with the importance of how that's led to this moment. But yeah, base building. Dream Defenders this year, we've entered our first phase of our new Freedom Needs Fighters campaign, where we'll be introducing a legislative package based on our freedom papers. And phase one, which is all of this year, has been about heavily investing in our membership and growing our base. So for DD, Dream Defenders, our membership are, more than emails on a list or people who like put their names on a sign-in sheet at an event. The young people who make up our membership are our friends, our neighbors, literally our family in some cases. And they're the lifeblood of our organization. We just believe fundamentally that when we invest in the people who make up this organization, that we can have real wins through really sustainable organizing. So just as an example, I am the co-director of Dream Defenders, and I have been since 2021, but I started off as a member in 2012. The death of Trayvon Martin, which is what made this organization be founded, drove me to action. And I went to a protest, and then somebody thought I was a leader and invested in me, right? I got taught to knock doors, and I was politically sharpened, and I learned how to create campaigns. I learned how to become a storyteller. And I am one of hundreds of people that have been through the membership of Dream Defenders that have a story like mine. We have a member right now in Pensacola, Florida, who's running for city commission, and she's not the first, right? So membership development and like creating a base of leaders that can lead fights is something that got really hard, frankly, during the pandemic. So that is what we've spent a lot of time this year doing, like coming back to that. I think the switch to being offline and trying to be safe and keep folks safe, there was just something lost in that. We did the best that we could, and we were still obviously in the streets and fighting. But yeah, I think we lost a little bit of the plot with our leadership development, and it became about like there's so many people in the streets, let's absorb them, right? Let's get them in here, and then we'll figure it out. So the figuring it out is going back to the fundamentals of leadership development. And so, yeah, we have a training membership development department now that's formalizing our retention and development processes. We've got book clubs and political education calls for our national and local membership. Our communications team is teaching our folks how to create narratives and be storytellers. We have a member trainer team. And so it's not, we're putting a lot of energy and investment into them. And it's not just for the sake of investment either. It's also preparing them to take on more leadership in the organization. We hope that these are like the first steps to creating a new generation of DD leadership and movement leadership. We're going to launch a member board this year. Next year, we're going to have our first Congress, I think since 2012, where membership will really they will have been trained and invested in for more than a year, and they will be able to make informed decisions about some key strategic directions for our organizations. So we take the development really serious. And then to the direct, our services, and why meeting people's needs is important. In Miami, we have our Healing and Justice Center. And we are trying to prove that we can have a world without police, that the community can answer our needs. We have a youth program that I'll dig into for 2 seconds after this. We have a mobile crisis unit, which is a literal van that drives around Liberty City answering people's mental health crises. It's an alternative to 911 and police. We have a trauma recovery center that does casework when we experience people that are going through gun violence. What do you need? Do you need help with rent? How can we connect you to? We have therapists on staff, and our youth program. So we experience a lot of youth, specifically in the Liberty City community in Miami, who are dealing with gun violence. So they've either experienced it themselves, have had family members or friends die. And in some cases, they were the kids who were behind the trigger. And so we've provided them with space. We just did a peace summit last month where we brought kids from across all these neighborhoods that, typically have beef and typically like end in violence, and gave them space to process. We did social emotional learning. We're in 4 different schools now in Miami-Dade County trying to do this like program. And the hope is that if we invest in the direct and immediate needs of these children, they become advocates for a better world, for the systemic answers that have like put them where they are in the first place, that have created like these cycles of violence, and that they will be like, frontline like leaders in this fight to end this terrible stuff. So yeah, investment. We've been like really going hard on giving folks what they need and training them up and skilling them up. And yeah, we hope that that is going to, keep this fight sustainable.
Thank you, Naila. You said so many powerful things, and I just want to pull that thread, right? No, thank you. Please don't apologize. But you drew a thread from your own beginnings with Dream Defenders when the organization was just getting started to now being one of the incredible, brilliant Black woman leaders of this powerful organization so many of us look to as a political home. And to hear how deeply rooted in the ground you are in trust is a reminder of what organizing makes possible to fill the voids that government is not close enough to folks to know how to fill. To have the self-reflection, to know what was challenging during the pandemic and to pull it into strategy so quickly in this particular season is all something that I know we can attribute to your incredible leadership. So thanking you. And with that, knowing that we're going to come back around, we're going to talk about governing power. What do you do with all that trust? We'll come back around. But now I'm going to turn to Elsa Bañuelos Lindsay, who is the executive director at Movimiento Poder. And in the organization's own beautiful words, they say Movimiento Poder is building a world where first generation migrante women and queer Latines can thrive, live with a sense of belonging, have enough abundance to keep each other safe, and build collective power to liberate themselves and their communities from all systems of oppression. Elsa, we know that schools have always been a key point of interventions in your work, and you've had some incredibly important victories in the last few years, but you've also seen quick efforts to try to dismantle those wins, like Angel and Naila to some degree also spoke about. So inviting you to share with us all, what forces are driving criminalization in schools? And what are the opportunities on the horizon that you want to give us sightlines into?
Thank you, Jamie. Again, Elsa Bañuelos Lindsay. I am in Denver, Colorado. I am first generation Mexicana in this country. And I too went through DPS myself throughout my whole academic life. And I have 3 kiddos in DPS as well. So this is also a very personal issue now that I'm older. I'll just kind of go back to like our 4 pillars to kind of give you, maybe I'll do that. So if we can go to the next slide. I don't know who's managing the slides. So thank you, Jamie. You really talked about our mission and vision. We've been around for over 35 years. We are formally known as Padres y Jóvenes Unidos. I've been with the organization. I will be celebrating my 21st year in November. And the organization has evolved since then. We changed our name in 2021 to Movimiento Poder. It was a collective process because a lot of our young people at the time, I think because of these conditions, did not feel really connected to what we say Chicanismo here in the Southwest of the country. And it didn't land to people. So like having the Aztec logo, the colors did not vibe with our young people. So we did a whole process when I became the executive director. And we also changed our mission and vision to be more inclusive. our young people said, we are, some of us don't identify as Chicanos, some of us are first generation, some of us are still migrantes, some of us are still like living in mixed status families, some of us are women, some of us are queer. Doesn't mean that we're working on these issues specifically, but we need to be able to create a place of belonging for our young people, political home where they feel safe and protected. Next slide. And we also just evolved into really being very holistic in the work that we do. Our staff is 100% Latin, first generation or inmigrante, and all women as well. And we have some queer folks as well on our staff. But we are co-designing with community an organization that is very inclusive. For the longest time when Padres is around, we focus just mainly on organizing, which is needed, right? It's a sense of hope for a lot of us. But after COVID, the increase of like mental health needs was an issue. And a lot of us did not have the resources to go see someone. So we really talked about like collective healing. So that's like our Nuestra Alma work, which really is centered around radical healing and love. And really bringing in practices like collective practices that addresses that. Nuestra riqueza is that, there's immediate needs that we need to address. A lot of our young people are going to like horrible schools and need academic support, for example. So that is something that we offer to our members is like, yes, we're going to be fighting for educational justice, but let's also help you right now with your academic work. And we also do other supports around like that really support our members, including our parents. I should also say we're an intergenerational organization and work very closely with parents as well. Nuestra Voz is our organizing. That's the vein of who we are and what we do. We still do a lot of community organizing. Everything is based in and everything's just rooted in that. Nuestro Voto is our civic engagement work. For the longest time, very long time, we were like, we don't need to get involved in elected politics. And, as you all see, we should be involved and really educate our folks to be part of that. So we believe that in order for young people, especially to find their voice, speak their truth, and build power within themselves, we need to really see them as a whole. We need to see them really just provide those supports that they need to be able to be strong, to build that power, and then in order to build collective power. So to your question, Jamie, about like, what are those conditions? Thank you, Jessica, for providing a lot of those contexts in Denver. For the longest time, our organization, we were able to hold the district accountable. We were able to really be able to push a lot of things within that existing structure. But with the new school board really practicing like, the policy governance model, it's scary. We're seeing the implications of that. It is a step to dismantling public education, dismantling democracy within that structure. We vote for school board members, and we go to them and say, hey, like, we have these concerns. And now it's like, because they've given one individual a lot of power, they're like, that is not our job. You have to talk to the superintendent. And then we try to hold the superintendent accountable. And he says, I'm not an elected official. I can do whatever I want. So those are the dynamics and conditions that we're working in. Like right now we're dealing with school closures. It's a scary thing. And it's impacting our community, specifically in Southwest Denver, where the majority of our communities are inmigrantes, first generation, and working class, mainly brown folks in the neighborhood. And it's pretty scary. I mean, the school superintendent recently said in an article that they will not be convinced once they publish the schools are going to close, and that they're going to stay firm with their decision. So right now, our young people have developed a student bill of rights that will be launched tomorrow that really addresses 10 points. It feels like I've been in this work. I was also in community organizing when I was in high school, but it feels like we're continuing to work on this, fighting for good schools, fighting for better curriculum. But right now is such a critical point, like Jessica said, that we not only are we like there's this charters. Our charters are really big in Denver as well. But the school closures and innovations, the district has done a really good job to soften the introduction of these different types of schools, right?
Yeah.
So we're having to really, we really have to figure out like how to educate people, which we're doing through a lot of PEs. But I think we can talk about a little bit more in a bit.
Yeah. I mean, and you hit, Elsa, no surprise, so many points, right? Speaking about like how you call young folks in, create a safe and welcoming space for them, and then really activate them to use their own agency. So we're definitely going to return to that topic and talk about how that builds power. We're going to talk about this moment even more right now. So we're going to go conversational. So we're going to invite all the speakers to come on screen if we can have our Grant Makers for Education family help us with that and turn right to the elections and connected work. So Naila, I'm going to come to you first, and then anyone else is welcome to jump in. And here's the question for us as we contend with this moment. What are and we're going to need folks, if we can bring Jessica, Naila, Elsa is here, and Angel on screen. That would be great. Thank you. There you are. Okay. So here's the question, starting with you, Naila, and then anyone else can jump in. What are the threats and opportunities you're seeing in the run up to November's elections? What are you prioritizing? And we recognize this is a C3 conversation. What are you prioritizing in the lead up to elections and in the scenario planning some of you are doing for beyond those elections? How do you connect this to the needs and dreams of your members and the threats you've named here, as well as the opportunities? So welcoming you to kick us off, Naila.
Well, the election is always a challenging time, especially down here in Florida. Many of you are aware of who the state's legislative leadership is. And so, this election years can really make or break people's belief sometimes in like the work that we do. But this year we have lots of opportunity, actually. It's not all dark and twisty. Here in Florida, yeah, we have 2 amendments that we're working on. Abortion access is on the ballot in Florida, much to the dismay of lots and lots of people. And the ability to win that will make Florida, of all places, one of the only states in the South with abortion access. So we are throwing down for that. Amendment 3 is also on the ballot this year, which is legalizing marijuana, which, for us means a lot less people will probably be in jail for possession charges and other drug-related charges. So the opportunities there are making some of our sometimes cynical membership, young and cynical membership, have some hope for Florida in particular. And then, yeah, there have been many conversations in our membership about up and down the ballot. And, some people are very excited. Some people, again, feel a little bit more cynical. But one of the conversations we just had with one of our members was about the fact that they don't dream about, getting harder at the border. They don't dream about harsher immigration laws. They don't dream about increased criminalization, and they don't dream about, funding death overseas. So we're having lots and lots of hard conversations with our membership right now about like what showing up in November means, and that our membership is in the work. You show up every day. You coming out in November does not change what you do for the rest of the year and in the rest of your trajectory in this fight. So those are some of the opportunities, the amendments, sort of the education and the back and forth with our membership and the spaces that we're creating to have them sort of process what the choices are. And then I would say, again, I keep saying Florida, but some of the scenario planning we've done with our partners literally includes physical violence and like threats at the polls. The state has, we saw it in 2018. We're seeing it now where people have to re-register if they vote by mail. Our state legislature has created a lot of barriers to voting here. And so we did it in 2020, and we're starting to have conversations now about what it looks like to do election protection. How can we show up for our communities to just be like a reassuring presence, or what do we need to do to get our membership ready to like, support even their family members going to the polls. So,
yeah.
sorry.
And no, and I just I think building on that, I hope what our audience is really hearing, right, is the ways in which it isn't just that you all pop back up 5 months before an election, seek to get the right people into positions, and then step back and take a nap for a couple of years, right? Like the way in which you are a lifeline for folks thinking proactively about how to keep each other safe, as a component of learning together to build strategies that ensure we can hold folks accountable, that have that power. So I want to just invite if anybody else wants to add something there before we turn to that wielding of governing power, which is where I want to go before we turn to audience discussion. But yeah, Angel, I saw you coming off mute. What you got?
Yeah, I just want to, we organize year rounds on issues that impact our community. I think of, there's a lot of organizations that do transactional work in our communities, gearing up for the election. But we talk to people about school closure and air quality, and access to real resources. So I think our civic engagement is top priority around election time. One of the threats that we see under Project 2025 is, getting rid of the Office of Civil Rights, right? Like right now, our school closure plan is in violation of Title VI, Office of Civil Rights. So that is a resource that we need in our communities to push back against school closures and school privatization and harmful policies that happen in public schools. I think one of the opportunities, it's a continued opportunity in our organization, is our parents get so pissed off that, they start asking, how do I run for office? And we've had members actually run for school board here in Pittsburgh and in Western Pennsylvania, and we have been successful. We're very C3. But when you have parents that are begging school board members to vote the right way, to stop criminalizing our students, stop arresting our students, and demanding that we have restorative programs and services and educating our kids with love, don't think of our kids as super predators or push them away from their education. We get to a point where we're blue in the face, we're going to fight them till we're blue in the face, and we can't get anywhere. So we actually have to shift to position our people into political leadership.
Yes. That's a thread we've heard from so many of you, right? Your own journeys of leadership as organizers into leadership. So maybe taking one more thought on this, and then we'll turn to governing power.
Yeah, mine will be short. I think that this is also an opportunity to build a collective narrative that benefits our people. I think that we are living in a scarcity fear mindset that the right has done a good job with. So I think that because everything's so in your face and tangible, we're starting to see a lot of community folks and young people seeking a political home, which we are. and just bringing them along to build this and be able to see all the interconnection, right? The interconnection between school closures and all these other issues. So in the election and in talking about like doing this year round and building that trust, I think it's a good opportunity despite everything else that's happening.
And thank you for that. And just, naming none of this is new, right? Let us not be lulled into any sense of this is new. Project 2025 is just the latest version of a 40-year plan to dismantle so much of what we've been talking about, to create obstacles to the kinds of community power building and connection that are so critical. And so relatedly, earlier, Jessica talked so powerfully and briefly about preemption, right? This way in which levers of power at the state level are being used to dismantle the wins that community have sought and achieved. And we already know about Project 2025's plan to abolish the federal U.S. Department of Education, et cetera. So each of you is working in a context where that very existence of public ed is being threatened by political forces exerting their power through privatization, school closures, and all these other efforts that seek to strip away resources and support. But you're creating the conditions to win bigger power, including governing power. And Rosa, I see your comment in the chat. Everybody, audience, keep those coming. So CJSF, we're using the changing states framework definition of governing power. So I just want to share that here, right? The ability to set, change, and protect an agenda. So want to just like really talk about what's it going to take to do more of that, right? What do you all need from us, from philanthropy, from each other, from, folks in this work? So I'm going to start with Elsa on this one, and just invite you to share a little bit about what will it take to build governing power accountable to education justice, the education justice movement's demands, and what would you want us to know about how you've been doing that since the last election to now? And in particular, in the context of your work in Colorado and in Denver, how are you trying or acting to move systems leaders? And why is that a part of your building governing power work?
Yes, thank you. I think it really goes down to one, resources. I mean, it's this capacity, right? We need more people to do this work. That's just, I know everyone will say that, but it's really, that's what it really is. It's really leadership development, and doing transformational leadership development takes a long time. Especially when you're working with high school students and adults, especially for adults that come to this country, they buy into like, this is better where I'm from, from Mexico. But it's really undoing a lot of like we're decolonizing our minds, right? And a lot of that is doing political education and really providing the tools and the opportunity for young people to learn that, and to also just feel their power. Because, going through DPS all my life, you are beat up from the moment you go, right? It's just like, there's this assumption, right? We all know this, that, oh, she doesn't speak English, Spanish is my first language, she's not going to make it, she's going to be doing XYZ. And hearing that for many years, and once you're an adult, you're just like, yeah, I'm just going to work, and not really think about the bigger picture. So it's powering. You can really build power when you hone down and you really do that leadership development, which is part of those pillars that I talked about. Bringing in the radical healing, because we also have to heal, and then also providing those skill sets in the context of like, no, it's not your fault that you cannot read this paper, being in 9th grade. This is the system, and always connect it back to the system. What is the problem? Why is it set up for us to fail? And always encouraging people to be like, and that is why we do the work that we do. Let's get you through this, but let's talk about why this is happening. Like the 1%, the 40-year agenda. We talk a lot about that. We talk a lot. Now we're talking about Project 2025. So really just investing in the development of young people in the work that we do. It's so powerful. Like, we've really made this change the last 2 academic school years, and to hear young people to say, if it wasn't for Movimiento Poder, I wouldn't know who I am. I wouldn't be embarrassed of my culture, my language. I wouldn't even consider going to college. And then, hey, because we don't have an alumni project yet, is like, we want to come back. We want to be organizers, or we want to be mental health, social workers to work with students from Movimiento Poder, right? And that's like self-governance. But it really, really is a lot of the leadership development with the political work, with understanding like, this is why this happens. And in order to do that, it's like, you really need to like go down to like understanding why conditions exist, but then also seizing their power and understanding that collectively we can build power and make changes.
Time, money, deep trust. Who else? Who else wants to share?
I just want to add to Elsa's point is that support, and I put in the chat cash, training, research. So we find ourselves moving into a direct service world because we meet so many parents that are in crisis. And in order to support them through their leadership journey, we have to address some of their needs when maneuvering, how to get education for their students that are either dealing with a disability or school push out. That's like suspensions or long-term expulsions, because it just feels unauthentic and not right to try and push somebody to speak at a public hearing when they're concerned about the safety and the education of their students. So I think that as we grow in our organizing, thinking about trauma-informed organizing, and meeting people in crisis and directing them to services, like that is the space and the reality that we live in. And that support, that work is often not supported by philanthropy, because they're like, well, there's other direct service agencies, but there's not service agencies that do what we can do. And that's actually holding the hands of our parents trying to maneuver through the education system. There's not a world in where those resources exist. So I would say just kind of supporting organizations that have to do that as part of their growth and development of their constituents.
That's right. I just so appreciate Angel. That's not like a nice to have. It's a must have. And I remember in the first few weeks of the pandemic when everything was locked down, the first responders were community organizers who already had the phone numbers. They already knew where people lived. They knew what people need, and they had the trust to say that you can trust this, you can do this with your child's school. You can get the tests you need here. You can find the, groceries and other things that you need here. And so we have to stop drawing these bright lines of direct service providers, you don't fit, organizers, you don't fit. And remember that so many of you are doing all of those things. And that's what allows you to be the through lines, right? What's the average tenure of a superintendent in a school district these days? I think it's down to like 2.1 years. But a student, a family, an educator who's invested in, and wouldn't we love to see a more diverse school educator base who's supported to thrive? We are the through lines in education. So investing in your work is so important. Naila, Jessica, want to kind of bring your voices in. I'd love to hear a little bit. Each of you in different ways are working in a lot of coalition spaces, which can be tricky and so critical to building governing power, building from local to bigger. Just welcoming any thoughts you might want to share.
Sure, yeah. Coalition spaces have really sometimes been like, I mean, yes, they're challenging, but the coalitions that we're in Florida, I think have been really sustainable and really sort of helped us get from one point to the next in some cases. So we're part of Florida for All in Florida, which is statewide base building organizations that are progressive. Like we have sort of principles together that we've created through the years, and we do a lot of our election work together, a lot of our GOTV together. We've created theory of change tables in different locales in Florida so that we can get to the deep, like necessary work and collaboration locally that frankly we need to have in a state like Florida. And then a newer sort of project and coalition we've been working on is the youth alignment table in Florida. We're working with, other youth-based building organizations, again, to do some GOTV work, but also train our bases. And that has really sort of like helped Dream Defenders feel like everything is not on us, right? Like we can be in partnership with other people, and like genuine partnership. This is not just like we know each other deeply and like we've done the like relationship building that is necessary for like trusting coalition work. So we've been in a lot of those spaces in 2018, like in preparation for the 2018 election, in the lead up to 2020, 2022, and now 2024. So it, our coalition work in a lot of ways is like part of our home base and like really necessary for us to keep a bird's eye view on the state. So yeah, I mean, helping coalitions and not just like throwing money at them, like help them build trust so that the work gets done in a non-transactional way. I think is a thing that I would advocate for.
Yeah, and definitely, Jessica, if you have thoughts to share, just kind of wanting to amplify, Naila, the importance of that and like how powerful it is. And so often we see tussling around like who's holding a space and who gets to shape that space. And it's really powerful what you have all done and the role that you play. And we know that Dream Defenders and some of your partners are not alone in contending with the fact that groups with limited financial resources often struggle to engage in coalition work because they have to make really hard choices around how to deploy limited human labor. But the ideas are there, the vision is there. Imagine if we invested in that more fully. The multiplying effect of doing so.
And I can just add for us, we try to be really intentional about coalition spaces that we're in because, we're not organizers ourselves. Like we are trying to lift up and support the work that you all are doing on the ground. And so using our time and making sure we're in spaces where sometimes that voice is missing or not that we're trying to replace that, but there's a lot of decisions being made in these kind of grass tops level with no connection to actually impacted people. And for us, like we try to keep like our ear, the if these walls could talk, to kind of bring that knowledge to the folks actually doing this work every day. Because there I don't know if there's that connections, right, with what honestly probably everyone has shared, the limits on capacity, right? If you are doing rapid response, if you are trying to support the needs of that your people are bringing to you every day, do you have time to comb through 50 pages of some random policy that is being proposed at the city council? Probably not, but we probably do. And so, we try to fill in those gaps and provide whatever we can to kind of lift up the work that you're already doing that maybe, you can't focus on right now, but it's not because you do not want to kind of add that to and really support support the base building that you all are doing.
And Jamie, if I could just add respectfully, y'all, having worked at a national foundation with the scale and reach of a Ford Foundation, right? I think this is more to my funder colleagues on the call. Sometimes we do fund with bias. We make the assumption that a locally rooted or state-oriented organization does not have the ambition or desire to reach for scale, to reach across geography, and therefore we don't fund them adequately to be able to do that. And I know for a fact, just in my one short year here at CJSF, that a lot of the groups in this partner network are actually critical to statewide formations. They're critical to multi-issue coalitions. And if they were funded at the scale of their vision, they would be even that much more impactful at orchestrating the terrain of governing power that would allow them to push for the changes that they want. The changes are multi-issue, they're holistic, they're multidimensional, they're accountable to real people, and we don't fund that way. Particularly those of us who are funding in issue lanes, for example, those of us who are primarily concerned with education, we stay very narrow for just the ed fight, the ed policy fight, without recognizing that the people that these base building groups are building are creating a comprehensive analysis and shifting the cogs in the wheel of how power is organized in a place that once they're successfully able to do that in coalitions with deep, big bases, with very trained leaders, such like Naila, who become EDs, once they do that, they can actually pull multiple levers and push for statewide agenda change, where ed is complementary to immigration, is complementary to housing justice, is complementary to climate. I say that for those of us who live only in our ed bubble, we're needed, we're important, we're here for you. And we do have to think more broadly on how are we making funding investments that actually position the long-term reconfiguration of power dynamics in a place and a state or at a federal level.
I think you just dropped the mic, Manuela. And that feels like a perfect place to start to wrap up and leave with conviction that we can do the things that you are naming as possible. So I'm going to invite each of our speakers to just share one word. What's giving you hope? And let's start with you, Jessica, one word, and then you're going to pass it to Elsa.
My word is y'all. Elsa.
Inspired.
Angel.
I should go last. I'm so jaded and my feelings are so hurt by what's happening in Pittsburgh right now. But this group has made me feel whole. But once I hang up, I'm gonna feel pissed off again.
Naila. Thanks for the honesty, Angel.
Members.
Members. There you go. I'm gonna double down on y'all. I'm gonna say thank you. And I'm gonna pass it to Alexandra and Stephanie to take us home.
Thank you, Jamie. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Mane Nunez. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I'm the Deputy Director of Development at CJSF. First of all, thank you so much for your time and staying the course. We covered so much over the past 90 minutes. And before we close, I want to thank Stephanie and the GFE team for offering us this opportunity to bring our partners and to share their wisdom and their experience. I also want to thank Angel, Jessica, Elsa, and Naila and their organizations for their dedication to the work on the ground and for sharing for being honest and giving us clear guidance so that philanthropy can move with them. Before we go, I want to also offer you an opportunity to stay connected so that we can keep chatting and getting to know each other and maybe even supporting the work of our partners. And so I'm going to drop a link, or Nico's going to drop a link to a survey where you can fill out and check all the right boxes, and two ways that you can connect with us coming up in the next few weeks are actually in-person events. The first one is September 11th, where CJSF is hosting a meetup in the Bay Area. There will be food and drinks and a fabulous Afro-Cuban, Afro-Caribbean drumming group that is going to bring their good vibes and ancestral lessons to the event. Again, it'll be in person, and if you're interested, fill out the survey and make sure you check off the appropriate box. The second event is actually at GFE's annual conference. On October 16th, CJSF is leading a session entitled Powerful Community Voices, Advancing Education and Democracy. In many ways, it's an extension of this conversation, and we will explore with partners across the country. We're going to explore how Black, Brown, Native, and LGBTQ Two-Spirit educators and caregivers are planting seeds of power through transformative visions of schools and communities, and how this work is essential to defending America's democracy. And with that, again, I'll say thank you. And I'll turn it over to Stephanie, who has her own announcements.
Thank you so much, Alex. I just want to appreciate all of the movement partners who spoke today and all of the staff from CJSF. I put in the chat that my word was fight. I feel like we know we are in for a fight. We have precedent from those who fought for justice before us, and I feel super inspired by the wisdom and insights and reflections that all the experts shared today. So appreciate being in the fight with you all. By way of some closing announcements from Grantmakers for Education, the video from today's conversation will be available in about a week or so. We will circulate it out to folks who are on the call today, as well as have it on our YouTube channel. We always love for folks to stay connected with us, and you can find out more about some of our upcoming programs in the link I dropped in the chat. We would love for you to join us. We've got our Equity Storytelling Fellowship kicking off this Friday. As Alex mentioned, our in-person conference in Minneapolis is October 16th, and the registration deadline is October 1st. And of course, we have additional virtual programming. We would love for you to join us. So thank you all so much again for being here this afternoon. Another appreciation to CJSF and all of the movement partners who shared today. Thank you all so much, and we will see you again soon.